those who don't, my name is Ashish Khaneja, and I'm the president of the Loyola Alumni Association here in Singapore, which, as most of you by now know, is a registered body that has been formed here in Singapore. And it is a not-for-profit association to essentially unite all Loyolites and to actually help us experience our collective strength and to drive a collective vision and purpose for all us Loyolites here in Singapore. Today's chat session is actually a launch session. It is the first of what I hope becomes a series of ongoing scheduled conversations on contemporary subjects of interest to all of us. It is therefore imperative that we all participate in molding this platform so that the topics and conversations are driven by our likes and dislikes. So please speak up and drive this platform as your own platform, and your participation is key to taking this forward. So that was my 1-minute advertisement. I had to put that in because we are starting a new initiative. Back to the main topic. Today's topic is titled Career Resilience During COVID-19, Uncertainty and Beyond. We've all been homebound these last 12 weeks or so, and we've experienced what can only be expressed as nothing short of a complete change in the way we know and perceive our normal lives to be. I do not wish to talk about all that has changed in our personal lives being homeward bound, but we certainly have seen how things have changed at work as well. I sometimes feel that numbers and statistics tend to dehumanize a situation, so I'll refrain from talking about numbers and also the personal impact of life under this pandemic situation. But the focus of our discussion today is what we are facing in our professions and in our workplace. So we are perhaps at the beginning of what could be a new normal. And we thought this would be a great opportunity to look from within our alumni and find some eminent speakers, deep thinkers, and practitioners, those who've had a clear view and understanding of how this picture is unfolding. So we have 3 eminent speakers for today's chat, and I'm very pleased and honored to introduce them to you. Before I do that, some housekeeping, before I do these introductions. We have received quite a few questions, so we'll take them, we'll see how time permits, and we'll take them towards the end. You're also welcome to add live questions by typing them using the chat button at the bottom of your screen, or also by unmuting yourself and speaking out your question. The format of today's session is essentially going to be each of the panelists is going to make some initial comments for 5 to 7 minutes and frame the topic from essentially 3 vantage points: an academic point of view, an industry point of view, and a practitioner's point of view. And this will be followed by a discussion moderated by me, and then we'll get down to the Q&As. Whilst the focus of our discussion is primarily Singapore and the impact the COVID crisis has had to the professional workplace as we know it, we will try and discuss worldwide trends as well. For your information, this talk is being recorded and will be available on the Loyola Alumni website. So please do talk about it to your friends and colleagues who may not be on the call today and may have missed the live session. So let's get started, and let me introduce our esteemed panel. I'd like to start by introducing Georgie Anthony. We fondly call him Georgie. Georgie did his BSc Chemistry from Loyola the years 1977, 1980, and then subsequently went on to XLRI, where he did his post-graduation in HR. And Georgie has also worked with a lot of the global multinationals, including Unilever, Pfizer, and Nokia, and he's currently the regional director with personal search services group here in Asia Pacific. Georgie, for those of you who don't know him, is a very experienced senior human resource professional and has had a significant experience in the hiring of senior leadership roles here in Asia Pacific through his organization, which is called Personal Search Services. And in fact, he's one of the pioneers of executive search in India and currently one of the most successful firms in Singapore as well. And he's worked extensively in areas like talent management, leadership transformation, employee engagement, employee brand management, etc. Welcome, Georgie. Our second panelist is Apande Rajan, or as we call him, Rajan fondly. Rajan leads the talent function for MasterCard in Asia Pacific, based out of Singapore. He's a chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Personal Development UK and a certified Gallup Strengths coach. His personal purpose is to help organizations achieve their growth aspirations by harnessing the potential of their leaders and talents. He's worked earlier with Standard Chartered Bank and Dell, and now with MasterCard, as I mentioned. Rajan's areas of expertise include relationship management and the influencing and guiding of senior leaders on organizational people agenda, talent acquisition, capacity planning, senior and critical hires attraction and selection, as well as performance management, pay review, and performance management process as well. Welcome, Rajan. It's great to have you. And the third panelist, and sorry, Rajan was at Loyola. He did his master's in HR management the years 2003 to 2006. Our third panelist is Professor E.T. Abraham, who passed out of Loyola in 1982. Dr. E.T. is a professor and the head of Department of Southeast Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. He specialized in international relations and political theory for his PhD at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And for his PhD dissertation, he compared the experiences of India and Brazil with respect to the development of indigenous high technologies in both the countries. And it was during this period that he began what has become a lifelong interest in nuclear power, from its management to its excesses. Professor E.T. then worked for a number of years in the US, first as a program director at the Social Science Research Council in New York and Washington, before moving to the University of Texas at Austin, where he was the director of South Asia Institute. After receiving a Senior Fulbright Award, followed by a Senior Research Fellowship at the Asia Research Institute, he moved to the NUS, where he's been since 2012. With those introductions, I would once again like to welcome all of you to this session, to this first session. And I would now like to request Georgie to go ahead with his initial comments. Over to you, Georgie. Georgie? You are on mute, Georgie.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I was on mute actually. So thanks, Ashish, for that wonderful introduction. So what I would like to start by saying is, based on my experience, around 30 years in corporate HR, as well as last about 8 years in HR consulting and recruitment, so my comments are kind of phrased with that kind of a background. So my focus is going to be what people can do proactively in the current context. Once the recovery starts, what can people do proactively rather than react to the situation? So what has been seen is that there have been quite a few discussions, studies which are being done, which talks about various industries, the impact on them, and how they would recover after this impact of COVID. So you'll see that some industries would probably recover faster, some would be a bit slower. Now, how can we utilize this information? That's what is more important. It might not be 100% accurate or fully scientific, but it just gives us a guidance. So for example, what we are doing in our company in terms of the recruitment industry currently is looking at this information and seeing where should we focus in terms of our business going forward. At least the immediate future, what should be the focus for us, which industries we should focus on. Similarly, what I would suggest from my point of view is that how can people use this information in terms of their own career, in terms of looking at the future career prospects, what are the future jobs, which are the industries which one should focus on. So that's one area one could focus on. And the other thing which comes up is all organizations would have a lot of focus on costs going forward. So this could translate into redundancies. It could also have impact on jobs and organization design. As some examples which I think might happen, one is double hatting of roles. So one person doing one or two roles. There would be a focus on regional functions. So for example, companies have already started experimenting in terms of examining the size of the regional functions, also trying to see can some of these regional functions be shifted to countries, and again in a double hatting model, can somebody doing a country role also do a regional role. So from a people point of view, in terms of looking at it, the focus could be in terms of trying to understand where the organizations are heading. What are the likely changes going to happen within your own organizations? It's not necessary that all organizations follow the same kind of pattern. So it could be quite different in different organizations. So some of the things what could be done proactively at an individual level would be acquiring new skills. For example, in Singapore and India, both countries, I'm aware that there are a lot of schemes which are supported by the government in terms of supporting individuals to acquire new skills. Another area would be in terms of exploring new upcoming areas. So when you look at future jobs, which are the jobs which are likely to come up, more demand jobs, it could be things like data science, data analytics, artificial intelligence, blockchain, all this. So I'm not saying that everybody would be able to jump into these areas, but one has to look at from one's own experience and skill set what you can acquire in terms of new skills. So one has to do this proactively. And also when we talk about roles which involve double hatting and so on, sometimes one has to take a little bit of initiative, put up one's hand and say, look, I would like to try this new area. I would like to take on additional responsibilities and so on. So that's one area. Another area which is currently in a lot of focus is working from home. So this obviously, it doesn't look like a temporary kind of phenomena. It looks like it's going to be extended. Some companies have already started saying that a significant part of their workforce can comfortably work from home. So it is the question of what are the jobs that can be done without a problem from home. And so what this implication is, obviously for the company point of view, there are cost savings, but also other side is how companies would look at sharing this cost savings with employees. Because from an employee's point of view, there can be increases in cost, whether it's additional furniture or more broadband or whatever, there could be additional costs. So how companies would design their policies in terms of uh, sharing these cost increases for the employees. Then there is another area which is of a huge change in culture required from a remote working perspective. There has to be a culture of trust, because if employees are going to be not physically present in the offices, how they would, the employer-employee relationship will have to have a significant amount of trust. And also this implies, in terms of going forward, new performance management systems, new employee engagement models, because you're not going to be physically present in the office. Then how do you interact with each other? How to engage employees working in your teams and so on. And the last area which I want to cover is in terms of proactively doing networking. So in the current world where social media plays a critical role, it's very important to develop as well as maintain a professional network. When I say developing and maintaining a professional network, so it has to be something on a continuous basis, not only when a person is exploring a change of role or something like that. Because as an example, I mean, I get a lot of LinkedIn requests. People, they just connect with me, and the next line is, "Oh, I'm looking for a job." So that doesn't work very well. So it's important to maintain those relationships on a continuous basis and form them proactively. Don't wait till the last minute when you're looking for a change. Develop the network. Have a professional network who could also be mentors in terms of your career. So that's very critical for you to develop as well as maintain it on a continuous basis. And the last thing I would say is this particular network, our own network of Loyola Alumni Network, is a very powerful network. Last time when we met physically, we had discussed the kind of positions people are occupying within this network, and how we should utilize this network more effectively. And all of us here are willing to help in terms of anybody needs guidance on career or job search or whatever. Many of us are willing to pitch in and help. So therefore, please utilize this network more effectively. That's all I would say in terms of my preliminary comments.
Thanks, Jajit. It was very relevant. And in fact, I agree, the Loyola network can be a very strong network, and we are hoping that these sessions moving forward will bring a lot of Loyola alumni closer. Over to you, Rajan, for your starting comments. Rajan, are you on mute? Rajan, you are on mute. I think we can't hear you.
I think he just got dropped off, Ashish. I will ask him to join back. Rajan? Maybe we will have ET go and then we can have Rajan.
In that case, can I request Professor ET, can you go ahead, please, with your initial comments?
No problem, Ashish. Thank you. And let me get started. First of all, thanks to Ashish and Gopal in particular for setting this up. I think it's a very welcome initiative. And as Ashish said in the beginning, its success really depends on how much all of us are willing to be engaged and take part in its activities. That said, let me turn to the theme of today's discussion. Unlike the other two speakers, I'm going to step back a little bit from the details of corporate life or organizational change, and try and give us a handle on how we can start imagining what the future is. Because it's always difficult. The uncertainty now is very high. But we can see some trends, I believe, moving forward in terms of what we should expect. And so my job here is to really try and highlight some of the things that I think are quite critical, help you prepare for what the future is likely, possibly likely to bring. So I want to begin by identifying what I consider the main characteristics of this COVID-19 pandemic and the effects that it's had around the world. The first I want to suggest is that it's a very rare moment that something can be universal. And by universal, I mean anyone can get affected. The virus does not discriminate between people on the basis of where you live or how important you are or how tall you are or anything like that. So that idea of universality means that we're all equally vulnerable, some more than others, but we're all vulnerable to the effect of what this pandemic can bring. And that's a very rare moment or a rare feeling in the world that we live in. Come to be taken, I think, quite seriously. Similar in related fashion, I want to suggest that this is the global turning point. It was felt, it is felt around the
Iti,
world.
your voice can't be heard clearly. Can you come closer or something?
Is this better?
Yeah, slightly better.
I'm hearing a bit of background noise from something, but anyway, I'm sorry if it can't be heard. Anyway, I'll try now. Hopefully this will be better.
Better.
Is that better at all?
Yeah.
Or are we having the same
It is
problem
better.
yesterday?
It is better. There is some background noise that is gone now. Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay, the first thing I mentioned was that this is a universal moment, right? In terms of anyone can get affected. The second point I want to make is that this is a global turning point. It's felt around the world, but not equally around the world. And that's also important to notice. Depending on location, depending on age, gender, resource endowments, ethnicity, all of these factors will affect how it's felt. Nonetheless, it's one of the few things that we can actually say that at the same moment, people around the world are experiencing the trauma of this pandemic in some way. And so in that sense, it's one of the few truly global moments that we have faced in the last many, many years. Third, I want to say that this is not, as many people have suggested, a black swan event, meaning something that happens so rarely that it cannot be predicted, but rather it's a known unknown. We knew this was coming, but we didn't know where it was coming or when it was going to come. And the known unknown makes it quite different in that sense, because it's something that you can actually compensate for, predict or plan for. And not that everyone was, I think, prepared for this in quite the same way, but it does make a difference because I don't want to suggest that this is something that came as a complete surprise to everybody. It wasn't the case. Similarly, in related areas, I want to say that this is not a natural disaster, as some people have suggested, but rather it's a man-made accident. In other words, this could have been prevented. But this also means, the moment you say it's an accident, that there is also human responsibility for what has taken place. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the nature of the accident, because that takes us too much into a different direction. In the Q&A, of course, I'll be happy to expand. But I want to just hold on to this distinction between a disaster, like an earthquake, which you can't predict, and an accident, which is eminently preventable. And finally, I want to say that this COVID-19 is not an event in the sense of how we think of the Olympic Games as an event or how we think of somebody's birthday as an event, but it's a process. It doesn't have an end. We know that this is going to be with us now for a considerable period of time. So this idea that we are going to find an end to this moment is not, I think, the correct way of thinking. Rather, it's a question of how we're going to adapt to a new condition which is going to become universal and global. What this all adds up to, in the most simple and crude manner possible, is that there is no return to normal. That idea that it's going to go back to how things were a year ago or 5 years ago, I think we should just give that idea up completely. There's no return to normal. There will be a future normal, yes, absolutely, but it's going to be very different from the past normal. And whether we consider social relations, whether we consider economic factors, whether we consider political considerations, all of these are going to be fundamentally different in the future than they are in the past and present. So this is one of those rare moments where turning to history to help us think through what the future is going to be like is not going to be particularly successful. We're going to have to see this, the future as it comes, and come to grips with it, come to terms with it, adapt to it in ways that don't give us, usually we have the past to turn to help us give us some clues of how to respond, less so in this case. Finally, I want to suggest that there is great unevenness in the way that this pandemic, this crisis is going to be experienced around the world. Depending on where we are located, first world, third world, Asia, Europe, US, depending on who we are, whether we're citizens, whether we're migrants, how old we are, what gender we are, what ethnicity we are, whatever this new normal means, is going to be quite different. A couple more points, and then I'll turn it back over to the next speaker. What are the likely scenarios in terms of what we should expect? For the since 1980, since last 40 years, essentially, we've seen a growing diminution or reduction or shrinking of the state, and a growing convergence of the private sector as the main leader or actor or agent in our economy. That's going to change. I think we are going to see a return of the state, not necessarily across all sectors, but certainly in some areas that the state had moved away from or stepped away from in the past. Now, this will affect all of us differently, so I'm not, again, going to go into details. I'm just trying to give you the kind of highlights, and of course, be happy to expand on any of these later. What this also means, I think, is that the social contract, the relationship of each of us to this state and this expanded state will be different in the future. Some of the good things that may come out of it in some places are universal public health systems, universal income schemes, ideas that have been floated in the past before, but never had the political will behind them to make it possible. These positives may also come out of this. So I'm not trying to suggest that everything that is going to take place in the future is necessarily worse than what happened in the past. I think there will be some goods as well. But by the same token, I think we are also seeing the end of the current phase of globalization and the replacement with much more inward-looking national strategies, and depending very much on the kind of country that we're talking about, we're going to see a decline in interstate cooperation and a growth of interstate competition. As Georgie mentioned earlier, I think there's no question, but we're going to see a regionalization of industry and international cooperation, less dependence on global supply chains, and the end of what you might call a phase of easy global tourism. You know, you would jump on a plane, fly off somewhere for a holiday, take a cruise. That moment, I think, is gone. It may return in different ways, but it's not going to look the same as it has been. To continue, unfortunately, on the somewhat more negative track, I'm going to also suggest that the inequalities that are there in the world are going to increase for some time to come. Increased social tensions, including nationalism, majoritarianism, and particularly for a number of us who live outside the country, a concern about migrants. There's going to be increased rise of prices as a result of these new economic strategies, and global remittances, which particularly affect parts of India in different ways, are going to decline. Finally, I want to suggest something about technology. Now, technology is often seen as the answer to all our problems. Even if there's a crisis or something that's broken down, we assume that the technologists and the scientists are going to fix it for us. I want to say that one should not be too quick to assume that technology has all the answers. It certainly provides us some ways out in the current crisis. We're looking at Zoom, for example, which we wouldn't have used before. We're looking at all these apps that allow food and other supplies to come to your home. Those are all the goods, and those will accelerate as they have been over the last few years. But the limits of what technology can provide, I think, are also becoming very clear. We are more and more aware of what face-to-face interaction means. We're also aware that some activities, and in my own sector, higher education, cannot be substituted by technology. We know, for example, that scientific labs and other answers, so-called, to our questions cannot work on the basis of remote interaction. And so I want to just suggest that medical technologies will not provide the fix that we're all hoping, and only limited solutions. The vaccine that we're all hoping for will not end the pandemic. It's only going to make it more easy for us to live with the pandemic. So the optimism around technology, I think, will decline, because we have to see technology as essentially ambivalent. It'll help some areas, but not in others. So let's not have a false optimism by turning to technology as saying this is going to solve our problems now and in the future. Let me stop here and turn it back to the other speakers. Thanks.
Thanks. That's very interesting, giving us a macroeconomic view of how things are going to shape up. And now over to you, Rajan.
Thank you, Ashish. Sorry about the tech issues before. So a quick thanks to you, Gopal and Mohan, for this opportunity. And I'm delighted to be here to kind of share my thoughts on this very personally passionate topic on careers. I think all of us over the last 2-3 months have heard this term probably, or rather we've used this term mostly, which is unprecedented for most of us. And I just wanted to start off with a quote on careers, and I think it is more appropriate for this unprecedented times that we are in. It's not what you achieve, it's what you overcome. That's what defines your career. This is one of the quotes that I picked up, and I think it's very, very appropriate. So it's not about what you achieve, it's about what you overcome. That defines your career, and I think it's very, very important to keep that perspective in mind. We've had the macro view from Professor Iti. We've had kind of an external market and landscape view from Georgie. So I'm going to just kind of provide kind of my thoughts on two specific things. One is around what is the organization's perspective? What are organizations thinking and doing? And then I will also kind of talk about, as an HR practitioner, as somebody who's very passionate about career development, a few things or tips that you can actually keep in mind. And I know Gopal would put a slide up there, and I will kind of talk through that. So I'm going to start off the organization's focus. If you look at the people strategy of many of the organizations, obviously they'll be using different language and things, but all of that actually comes to kind of, I would say, these 4 pillars that I've highlighted in the slide. And I've kind of used the acronym, something that is easy for us to remember, which is COPE. And let me talk you through that. The C in COPE stands for capabilities. If you look at the what of it, we are talking about here the functional skills, the professional skills, which is your softer skills, and then finally the leadership skills. So as a combination of these 3 things would actually kind of define in terms of your career success. So while that is the what, let me spend a minute on the why. This is important. If you look at the external landscape, the future of work, we are talking about robotic process automation. We are talking about AI, machine learning, the overall digital transformation. We are getting into the 5G kind of, I would say, the environment. All of this is going to have a significant impact on our jobs. Not only that, but also in the way how we work. And I think COVID has actually already accelerated that journey in terms of way we how we work, especially around the remote working, where I think many of the organizations have had at any point in time between March and April, 90 to 95% of their workforce, or nearly 100% of their workforce working remotely. The work that we're going to do is also become more insights driven. It's going to be multidisciplinary approach. And also, if you look at organizations, they will have to actually come together with strategic partners or people within their ecosystem, or I would even use the word frenemies, which means there are competitors or probably industry players that they will have to actually strike partnerships in order to stay relevant or bring solutions which are going to actually solve the consumer needs or probably provide a better consumer experience instead of trying to actually solve everything by themselves in a very siloed manner. So if you keep all of that in context, what's going to happen is there's a need for rapid upskilling to be able to meet some of the immediate or the shorter term surge in demands. And in the longer run, I think there's going to be a combination of obviously increased digital literacy, which is very obvious. And also more importantly, the social and emotional skills are going to become very, very critical for individuals to actually succeed in their careers in the longer run. So what is the action that we all should take? I think if for each one of us in our own fields, respect where we are in our career, in our career journey, I think things like reskilling. I talked about the functional, professional, and leadership. So we will have to make sure that we will have to reskill. In certain cases, we will have to make sure that we'll have to upskill if we have aspirations to go up the leadership chain, or if we're working in the new technology space. How do we keep kind of, I would say, pace with the new technology challenges, and how that's going to actually impact our own jobs, and also acquire new skills. And I think I'm going to spend some time talking about the how of this probably in the second half of my discussion. So action is reskill, upskill, and also acquiring new skills. And this is going to be a very, very key pillar. And many organizations are investing billions of dollars in making sure that people kind of are able to do this. And it's not done just in a very push way, but also people are being able to offer self-directed learning solutions, and they do it at their own pace and when they want it. So that's on capabilities. On opportunities, like we talked about, I think Georgie mentioned about the kind of this particular pandemic, or even generally, organizations have to do more with less resources, or they have to become more efficient. They have to become more, like they will have to optimize the resources, their kind of, I would say, the cost base and all of it. And also all of that will impact jobs. Hence, I think it's very, very important that each one of us in our kind of, I would say, our own roles, we have to stay connected, well networked within our organizations, and also follow what's happening within the industry, so that we know what are the opportunities that we can capitalize on as well. So it would involve actually taking up some additional stretch time to be able to learn new skills, or actually take on new projects where you can actually explore experiences that you haven't had before. So that's on opportunities. Let me talk about pipeline. I think this is a very, very important part when we talk about any organization. It's the overall leadership pipeline. I think when I say leadership, I think more and more there is a need for well-rounded general managers, people who had kind of diversified experiences where they've actually explored many different areas like sales, business development, product, be it even customer delivery or the technology side of things. Probably one of the enabling functions within finance, HR, or the legal side, in order for them to become well-rounded general managers when they take on those senior roles, to be able to drive success for the organization. And I think Georgie touched upon this piece around double hats. And I think we have to gain those critical experiences. That's one lever through which you can gain those critical experiences, where you stay in your current job, but you take on additional things, or probably you take on another role to be able to expand your scope and actually try new things. Yeah. So that's pipelines again going to be very key. And also if we talk about pipeline, there's also a gender pipeline where we want to make sure that the overall women representation or the female talent representation in organizations are at very healthy levels. And that continues to remain a focus as we develop more and more female leaders to take on senior leadership roles. The last and most important thing I would want to touch upon is engagement and culture from an organization perspective. Look at the times that we are living and look at probably even the external political environment. I think more and more, in addition to the emotional intelligence, the EQ, or even the IQ, our own CEO, like the MasterCard CEO, Ajay Banga, he's very, very passionate, and he talks about the third quotient, which is the decency quotient. So what does decency quotient means? I think it's about making sure that we are being a force for good. We are actually trying to be inclusive. We are actually having hand on the back of our employees and colleagues, rather than actually trying to kind of make life difficult for them. And not just in the workplace, but also generally in the communities that we operate in. So I think DQ is going to be very, very important. I think the kind of, I would say, significance of that is going to go up. People who want to join organizations look for what the organization stands for today. So I think I would say the culture and the decency quotient is going to be very, very critical. So just to summarize, if we are able to actually understand and cope with the capabilities, the opportunities, the pipeline, and the engagement culture initiatives of the organization, there is hope for each one of us. And we will actually come out on the other side very, very strongly, and also continue to have a successful career. I want to shift to the second focus, where I wanted to kind of quickly share some tips just based on my own experiences from a career development standpoint. Most of you or all of you would have heard about the term SIP, which is the systematic investment planning that we do from a finance perspective to make sure that we have enough money for the various different needs that we have. Similarly, from a career standpoint, we have to take an approach where we also have a SIP. And I have actually put that under 3 buckets, which is self-awareness, investment, and planning. So let me just kind of spend quickly what kind of some details around that. When it comes to self-awareness, we have to start off with who we are before we can start thinking about what we want to do. And I think it's also very important. We all lead very, very busy lives. I think we have to take time to be able to reflect on our intuition, and it moves us to be able to actually think about what our thoughts, desires, and actions, and it brings them to the forefront. If we do reflect and we actually have a very strong level of self-awareness, let me tell you, that is a very, very strong first step in order for us to have a successful career. You need to be able to be aware of all of your strengths and make sure that you invest in your strengths to be able to kind of grow further. But at the same time, understand where your lesser strengths are or so-called weakness, and make sure you try to improve, but I think focus on managing it, but actually do more on leveraging your strengths to be able to actually grow your further career. The second one is investment. So invest in relationships. It's very, very important. Georgie talked about networking. I talked about in the opportunity section, various things that are happening around us. It's very, very important that we invest in relationships. Very key. The second one I would say is invest in our overall health and well-being, because we have to actually stay healthy and we have to actually focus on our well-being. If we do that, again, we'll be very sharp and we'll be actually able to deliver impact at workplace. And also it's very important that we keep one concept in mind. And this is something that I've actually personally experienced it. And I think I've recently read a book which actually kind of explains that to me, which is Adam Grant. He talks about give and take in his book. And I think we all have to make sure that at some point in time, as we invest, we have to be able to give to the organization, give to others around us in very different forms, and also make sure that we are able to actually receive, and that will be reciprocated. So it's very important that we focus on giving and taking. It's not all about taking. We also have to pay forward, and we have to make sure that we're able to share whatever knowledge, experiences, and support our colleagues and people around us. Finally, plan, right? So coming in, I think talking about my own experience, coming back from the year-end holidays, starting the year beginning plans, obviously thinking about many different things. And come end of January, Chinese New Year, there was a googly for people who are familiar with the cricketing terminology, or if you're a baseball fan, you talk about curveballs. And I think the pandemic is in a way played out very, very big in this regard. So I think having a plan, it's not about writing everything down and charting out a 20, 30-year plan. No, what I'm talking about is directionally, where is that you want to head to, and making sure that you know what are the steps to get there and what you're going to be doing in order to get there, making sure that roughly you have that plan. And why is it important to have this plan? Let me share a few reasons. Number one, you need to be able to articulate that to the people that you work with, or even let's imagine you actually have your senior leader, you kind of go in the office lift or you get on a call and somebody asks you, what are your career aspirations? You should be able to actually share that in a very, very crisp and concise manner, let's say in about 90 seconds or 2 minutes, so that people know very clearly what you want. So having that rough directional plan will help you to articulate that in a very, very effective manner. The second reason is you'll be able to actually anticipate any changes or kind of, I would say, disruptions that are going to happen, and to be able to plan better and to be able to manage that change. Or in scenarios where you have a setback, you'll be able to actually quickly activate your plan to bounce back from that piece. You will not actually be lost, or you will actually not be in that mode of disbelief or denial. You will actually quickly move into taking actions, being very decisive, and making sure that you're able to actually transition very successfully into that stage, or probably manage that particular change very well. And one last thing I would say when this comes to this plan, there is no one final draft, right? You will have to keep revising your life to create your reality. This is something I picked up from a TED talk, and as something which resonated with me very well, which is any change that meaningfully alters your day-to-day life and can actually offer you the kind of chance to progress forward is very important. So you have to keep in mind that you have to keep revising to create your own reality. So thanks again for your time. Look forward to some of the questions and also having a dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajan. In fact, it's very interesting that we have three ways of looking at this situation, and these points of view become very interesting in terms of different dimensions to the reality that we are faced with. We have some questions coming in. Before I get to those questions, I just wanted to ask, from a very Singapore point of view, Rajan and Georgie, are you seeing, Rajan, in your case, in specific to your company, that there are strategies being made? Because you guys talked about double hatting, you talked about people working from home, or headcounts itself being changed because business has changed for organizations. Do you see on the ground some decisions being taken in light of the COVID reality? Georgie, you can go first.
Yeah, so I think, one has been reading a lot about redundancies which are taking place. So that's a reality. I don't think we can run away from that. Organizations like starting from large corporations like IBM and the travel related companies, especially like Ola, Uber, Airbnb, all of them have, started relooking at things. And for example, some of the other things which are happening is, again, from a cost point of view, even relocating the regional headquarters. So I think it was Uber, if I remember right, which is already announced that they would be relocating the regional headquarters out of Singapore, because all said and done, Singapore is a high cost location. So whenever there is a focus on cost for any global corporation, Singapore always sticks out like a sore thumb. So therefore, so that's an area where already a lot of organizations have taken decisions. The other area, like I mentioned, work from home is something which is going to become a reality. So unless it is absolutely essential for somebody to be based in an office, it would become a normal thing that people work from home. So that's got a lot of implications in the long run. Like I mentioned, the whole culture of trust. You are letting an employee work from a location where you don't have physical contact or control. So that itself, requires different system processes. Also, the technology perspective in terms of this, IT security, all that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of implications on all this already starting to happen. And many companies are already, taking steps towards it.
Sure. Rajan?
Yeah, thank you, Ashish.
So how you guys are looking at it at MasterCard?
Yes. So for us, I think our business has been severely impacted because obviously it thrives a lot on the cross-border travel. We are looking at it in 4 specific phases, and I will come to the Singapore piece. We actually look at this pandemic with 4 kind of specific stages of phases. So we talk about containment, stabilization, normalization or the new normal, and then the growth phase. We've actually slowly moving from containment to stabilization across many markets. And I think Professor A.T. talked about how it's going to be uneven. I think different countries are going to, it's the phase at which it's going to change and when it's going to happen is all going to be very different. So what we're trying to do is there are some global principles, but also there are very, very local and regional actions or empowerment is there to drive the planning and actions that we need to take, both in terms of growing our business and also the return to office piece. Number 2, what we're doing is we are continuing. I think we are in a place where since we have a very diversified business strategy, I think our value-added services, solutions, cybersecurity, the whole secular shift to actually electronic payments is all key drivers for our business. So those aspects are actually helping us get through this crisis, and I think we will emerge stronger. There are actually very, very strategically important roles that we are continuing to hire. And as Georgie mentioned, I think there will be acceleration or organizations will be more open to be able to actually offer flexibility to people. Today, as I talk about, probably just an example, there are 10 or 15 people who are supposed to move to Singapore who have actually started their roles in their respective home countries. They've actually started their roles in their home country. So how do we offer that kind of flexibility and the support? That IPs will change. And I think the whole office real estate space is also going to change, because I would say 30% of the people want to be in the office 4 to 5 days a week or work from office all the time. And the remaining people, they want to actually work completely from home, or they want to work only 1 to 2 days in the office. So that also is going to have a significant change. And I think that also will impact mental health, well-being, and also finally, how does the engagement and collaboration between the workforce and the colleagues happen? And all of these are very, very critical pieces for the organization to look at, and we are closely driving actions. And also we are asking feedback from employees almost on a 4-week basis to make sure that we stay connected to the ground.
Right. That's very useful to understand how a large corporation is looking at it. Professor Iti, I wanted to ask you, because Singapore is very involved with skills training, and they are going to get more active. Are there any things that you see coming in on the horizon that will be immediately relevant for people who are in a space where they need to reskill? Because we've talked a lot about reskilling. Do you see stuff happening on the ground from where you sit?
You're on mute.
When we say reskilling, in a sense, we're preparing for a future. So I would say that probably if we agree with Singapore's, of course, always a special case, right? Because even in the region, it performs some very unique functions. So it's not easy to compare with other places. Given that, we know that, for example, Singapore is moving to a more regional strategy. It's always been headquarters for regional companies, but that usually meant Asia Pacific or look to China, Japan, Korea. The turn towards Southeast Asian countries, I think, is going to become even more pronounced now. And so one element of reskilling beyond technical skills, you might say, like learning how to code or something like that, would be obviously language and culture. So if you can pick up Thai, if you can pick up Bahasa, if you can learn something about Vietnamese organizational culture, that's exactly what you need right now to be prepared 2 years from now when things are going to settle down. Now, it's not easy to learn a language depending on what age you are. If you're over your 50s like me, then learning a new language isn't easy. But if you're in your 20s or if you're 30s, this is absolutely something that you can and should do. Because the moment you can say that I actually know what this region looks like, you become much more valuable in the eyes of your employer. So that would be a very practical skill that I can think of when I use that word reskilling. There's others as well. It's the first thing that comes to mind.
Sure. Thanks. We have a couple of questions. In the interest of time, I'd request, we roughly have about 4 minutes, but what we'll do is we'll take 5 minutes additional. And let me go through some of the questions that we have. The first question is to you, Georgie. It talks about, it's from Christy Paul. You mentioned that working from home will increase. I was told that residential real estate will increase, including internet, telephone, etc. What are your views on this? So I think this work from home, and what that impact will be to compensation as well. Georgie, you're on mute.
Yeah. So work from home, it's got 2 dimensions actually. So one is from a company point of view, the employer point of view, and the other one is on the employee side. So when you look at the employer side, the issues like real estate, all that comes in, also the systems, processes, technology, all that is there. But it's equally important to understand the employee side, So because most of the discussions have been focused around the employer or company side. From an employee perspective, so, it's not easy for somebody to sit alone without a team around them to sit and work. That can be sometimes in a longer term, it can be a bit of a depressing thing. That's one. The second is also many of the apartments. So place like Singapore, for example, where it's mostly apartment living, they might not have enough physical space to have a separate office and so on. So these are some of the considerations. Physical space, a quiet, private space to work in an apartment. It might not be necessary that every house has got that kind of a facility. So, so these are some of the considerations from an employee's side. Again, when you look at the compensation side, I mean, some of the organizations have been very proactive, and they have been. I can talk about when I used to work with Nokia probably 15 years back. Then itself, companies who are progressive enough to reimburse things like broadband at home, so that your facilities are somewhat created to work from home. So these are things which need to be taken care by the company.
Right. Just take. Sorry, is there any other comment? Okay, we'll take two last questions. We have one from Arun Veliappan. Arun wants to know, are there opportunities for foreigners in Singapore, given this reality? Who wants to? Georgie, you want to take that?
So, see, in Singapore, even before all this happened itself, over the years, so I'll just give you an example. So when I moved to Singapore, which was about 23 years back, those days you apply for an employment pass and you start working. I mean, you don't even wait for the approval. That was the kind of situation. And you used to get invited to take on PR and citizenship and so on. That situation has been gradually changing. And so in my Nokia days, there were probably 200 foreigners working in Singapore, and I don't remember a single case where an employment pass was rejected. So that situation has been gradually changing over the last 10 years or so, which is, it's got political implications and all kinds of implications. So therefore, that the whole issue of foreigners, the foreign talent issue has always been on the surface. So what I would say is, my experience is, if it is a senior level role, and also it's a particular skill which is not available in Singapore, companies are still hiring from outside Singapore. Otherwise, the focus would be hiring somebody who is available locally.
Thank you. We'll take on the last question. We are at the top of the hour. It's 11:30. This one probably I would request Rajan and Professor Edie to comment. The question is from Thomas Verghese. He says, there have been two very diverse views on the new normal. On the one side, you have Satya Nadella, who has been reminding us of the relevance of in-person interaction. And on the other end, you have a spectrum of Facebook and Twitter, who speak about the immense flexibility of hiring with the ability to hire talent globally without relocating. Do you have any views on that? Very diverse views, actually.
Yeah, so I would actually say a couple of things, Ashish. Number one, I think employers actually are going to move more towards being able to offer more flexibility and choices to employees. And I think in a way, COVID has actually accelerated that thinking, or rather has very significantly moved the people who are either naysayers or people who are actually not very keen on kind of proceeding with that particular experimentation. All of that has been accelerated. And I would say the organizations will be very, very open and flexible. But the most important point to keep in mind is it's going to be, it has to make business sense. And also it has to be where we actually support strategic talent development, or where we want to develop certain leaders. So to give you an example, I think if we want to have, like, if we take a classic example with gender, I think women, because of either they are in dual careers with their spouses, or probably because of family caregiving requirements, probably their mobility is restricted at times or most of the time. So in certain circumstances like that, I think organizations will start offering more flexibility to them to be able to start doing regional global roles based in their location. While I've said that in a gender specific example, but I think that will become more true for everybody. So I would say employers will offer more choices to employees, and they will actually demonstrate more flexibility to be able to actually manage this change and actually be successful.
Thanks.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me try and speak to Mr. Thomas Verghes's question. I think on the first aspect of relevance of face-to-face interaction, I think it depends a lot on the sector. Obviously, when we're thinking about education and training, some things can be done online, other things can't. Face-to-face stuff is really, really important. But I also think it depends, if you're thinking of a project, at which stage of the project are you? At the beginning stage, when people are figuring out what they're doing, face-to-face interaction matters much, much more. Once it's become routinized, once it's become everyday, people can sit back at home and do what they need to do as long as they're doing their jobs. And similarly, when it comes to the end of a project, I think coming back to face-to-face again really, really matters. So it's quite important to be nuanced, I think, about these sort of general statements, like this matters or that matters. It does matter where we're speaking from and when. So let's take the question about Facebook and searching for the best talent globally. I think we know that's not true. For example, when Facebook was looking to moderate its discussions in Myanmar, which is which has very, very wide acceptance all across Myanmar, they found they could only hire 8 people who could speak Burmese and English at the level that they needed in order to both be a moderator and to communicate this information back to Facebook headquarters. Now, there's plenty more people who can actually speak Burmese and English, but they couldn't find them because they didn't know where to begin, because they were looking for credentials that they understood, but which didn't make sense in Myanmar. So one of the big questions now in terms of what this means, best talent globally, is a question of credentialing. What kind of credentials can you offer which translate across the world easily? Even though you might be incredibly skilled in a particular activity, particular function, particular expertise, if others don't realize how important that is, you're simply not going to be able to be viable in a global marketplace. Now, what that often leads to is people getting, degrees which are from overseas, online degrees or, long distance degrees and so on, as a way of saying, look, I already have these skills. Now I have this additional University of London degree, which sort of proves that I'm part of a global landscape. Well, smart HR people, and I'm sure both Georgie and Rajan can speak to this, know the difference between something that appears to be a global credential and something that actually represents the skills that translate across cultures, across countries, across sectors. So this question of how we translate that term global talent globally is not at all obvious to me. And I think it really, really needs to be thought through a little bit carefully. I think that assuming that big companies, because they have a lot of money and because they have a lot of clout, know what global talent is to me not at all clear, not at all obvious. And it's often the case that they are looking at it through very much their local lens. Facebook remains an American company. SAP remains a German company, even as they try and act as global companies more generally. Some companies are much better at doing this effectively, regionalizing or localizing themselves. I wish that were true across the board. It's not. So again, maybe I'm just because I'm in the university, I have to say on the one hand, on the other hand all the time. But what I'm unfortunately stuck by saying is that, all these easy to understand but hard to implement terms like global talent need to be thought through a little bit carefully when it comes to your own personal career and how you are going to represent yourself as one of these people who are desirable in this current moment. Let me stop there.
Thank you. No, those are very wise comments. And actually, this whole space is unfolding. I'm really glad that we have a panel of you 3 guys, and I'm looking forward to taking this discussion forward, because there is more to this topic that is going to evolve and emerge over the months to come. And I think we're going to have more opportunities to unravel, because companies are going to go through a lot of change, and so our personal lives. So once again, I'd like firstly to thank all of the people who've joined this call on a Saturday morning to get on to listening to our panel. I really want to thank the panel, Georgie, Professor A.T. and Rajan, This has been wonderful having three of you, getting three, perspectives from three vantage points has been very useful. We will perhaps, depending on the response and feedback that we get from the participants, we might identify a more specific topic moving forward based on what the feedback we get from the audience on this topic or similar topics moving forward. And depending on the response we get from not only the Singapore alumni, but the global alumni, because we'd like to open this up to the global alumni and also identify panelists from the global alumni. This time we wanted to kickstart this activity using our Singapore alumni, but we very much welcome the global alumni to participate both as panelists as well as participants. And in that sense, if anyone is interested to be on as a panelist, please get in touch with us. We'd very much like to talk to you. And at the same time, I look forward to your participation in the next event. I really want to thank Gopal and Mohan, who really made this happen. Without both of them pulling this together, we couldn't have had a seamless event. I look forward to all of you in the alumni getting more involved and trying to see how we can network better and make use of this platform actually to your benefit, given that we live in interesting times. So stay safe and have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ashish. Thank you, Gopal. Bye.